I will get us started. Thank you everyone for attending today's community conversation. A few housekeeping items before we do get started. Please know that we're going to be muting folks just to avoid any background noise during the presentation. We really encourage people to leave your cameras on and to help us fully engage with you during the presentation. Our speaker will talk for about 25 minutes or so, give a presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A afterwards, which I will facilitate. We really encourage you to post any questions you might have in the chat as well while the presentation is ongoing. My name is Frank Aiello, and I am a professor and chief of staff to Cooley's president and dean. I'm very excited to be here and wish all of you happy Pride. Pride is personally very important to myself and the president, who regrets he cannot be here at the beginning of the presentation. I think he is going to try to join as soon as he's able. Lots of pulls on his time, and he couldn't be here right at the beginning. I also want to note before I introduce our excellent speaker that we both the president and myself have a strong interest in trying to maybe get a critical mass of students who might be interested in an LGBTQ focused student organization. We had an Outlaws group at Auburn Hills, and I know we had an SGA at one point in Lansing, and I think there might have been a student group in Tampa Bay as well. We would love to kind of support reestablishment of a group like that at both Lansing and the Tampa Bay campuses. So if you have interest in that and want to reach out to myself or the president, we'd love to chat with you about that. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker here. This president's gone, so I get to do it. So that's one benefit. And that is Christine Yarrett. And Christine has been practicing law for over 3 decades. She's consistently been an advocate for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. As an attorney, writer, speaker, educator, and activist, Christine has fought against discrimination based on LGBTQ identity, gender, race, religion, ethnicity, and against sexual harassment. As a writer, public speaker, and trainer, she's shared her experience and expertise with social and nonprofit organizations, educators, students, social service professionals, religious groups, and businesses. Christine obtained her law degree from Stetson University, our neighbor down in Tampa Bay, and an undergraduate degree in business administration from Michigan State University. She's taught courses as an adjunct professor in con law, LGBTQ law, civil rights history, cultural communication, and diversity at Grand Valley. She's engaged in community service for national, state, and local nonprofit organizations and professional service for legal and education associations. She's a member of the Michigan Bar, Authors Guild, and the Alliance of Independent Authors. Her work has been informed by her personal experience as an Arab American, lesbian, parent, and wife. Christine has had leadership roles with nonprofit and professional boards and committees, including the LGBTQA law section of the State Bar of Michigan, of which I'm also a proud member, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, or GLSEN in Grand Rapids. She's the chapter co-chair there. ACLU West Michigan Lawyers Committee, which I know does a lot of really great and important work. The Lesbian and Gay Community Network of West Michigan, where she is the president of the board of directors. Healing Children of Conflict, where she was a founding board member. The President's Advisory Committee on Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Issues at Grand Valley. And she is also a faculty advisor, or has been, to a student LGBTQ organization at Grand Valley State University. So I'm very excited to hear Christine's presentation. And with that, please join me in welcoming her to Cooley.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm excited to talk with you about really important issues. And before I get started, basically I'm going to start with some slides for about 10 minutes, and then I'll go into talking about some of the root causes and practice tips as creating change. And then we'll leave hopefully time for a good Q&A discussion. So as I start, we'll start with the slides. The title is Outrageous Laws and Everyday Rebellions. This is close to Gloria Steinem's book in the 80s, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. And, I think we're going to focus on that today. So I'd like to start, next slide. And we're going to start talking about some of the laws that are problematic right now. And as many of you know, we'll start with Florida, their recent Don't Say Gay law. And this has been passed. I've got the language of the House bill that was passed. And certainly as you look at it, it applies to kindergarten through third grade. It talks about classroom instruction. What is that? Is that anything that's said in a classroom by school personnel or third parties? So it's very broad, vague, and then it ends with something about age-appropriate topics. And the other part of it is parents can sue. And that always, we talk about putting teeth into the law, and they're entitled, if they win, to get attorney fees. And that's always a significant thing. If you have a cause of action that allows for attorney fees, that can really gives an incentive to lawyers, but it also, creates a significant possible damage award in the form of attorney fees. So one thing, and just to give by way of example, and I've raised kids. When they were young, when starting in preschool, my partner and I would go and meet with the teacher and just explain our family. And as you may know, one of the earliest things kids do in starting in preschool in those early grades is to draw a picture of their family, and then later to bring photographs and put it into some format and then talk about their family. So right off the bat, these issues come up, and they always are age appropriate. So a kid is going to say, well, what do you mean you have two moms, or where's your dad, or vice versa. So it's hurting students, and it is age appropriate to talk about these things in the context of a particular family. So let's go to the next slide. Another outrageous law is a Texas Attorney General's opinion. And they've actually classified a parent is now potentially liable for child abuse if you, and it's a parent, counselor, doctors, if you engage in or facilitate any treatments or procedures. And imagine that. Imagine a parent who's trying to help their child, a counselor, a doctor, and whether it's, initial things in terms of the hormone therapy or other procedures and treatments. And remember, this applies up to 18-year-olds. And what a horrible thing to say that parent might be, found guilty. And child abuse is a potential crime. And it's also potentially a grounds to lose. It could be as bad as terminating parental rights, but in terms of foster care, being a part of a system where your parenting is challenged and you have to go through all kinds of hoops. It applies to all of the reporting requirements. And it is outrageous. And you think of, we're just coming out of that time with masks where parents were saying, and that was a public health issue, and parents were saying, my choice as a parent to determine if my child should wear a mask. And then, around in this overlapping time, a state saying, but you can't have control over helping your child or engaging in that in terms of their sexual orientation, or in this case, their gender identity. The religious exemption law, and all these laws I'm talking about, there's over 200, some people say 300 bills right now across the country that are anti-LGBTQ. And this would be another one of them. Actually, the ones I just mentioned are, and this particular one is a law in Florida that has been around longer. It's not recent. And as you probably know, the idea of religious liberty has been used by people to say, because of their religious rights, say freedom of religious expression, that they should not have to do certain things that relate to, for example, discrimination. This law defines an exercise of religion if it's substantially motivated by a religious belief, which is language that we've seen before in other cases, including the Supreme Court in past years. But then whether or not that exercise is compulsory or central to a larger system of religious belief. So that second part is really opening the door. So, for example, with transgender individuals, the connection with that, with religion, and it varies very much. Even within Christianity, there's churches, denominations, individual churches who have and discuss, very accepting beliefs. But this idea that whether it's compulsory or central, so then we get into that thing of a cake, of baking a cake, or having a facility used, it takes it much further than beyond the notion of religious freedom, which is a right to exercise your own religion. It doesn't mean you get to discriminate against people who don't have your particular religious views, and they do have, a religious freedom also. So, for example, in many of these cases that are about wedding cakes or venues, there's often, and I'm saying Christian because a lot of the cases have involved that, but there's often a Christian element to the marriage. And they might have a minister, they might have a process that includes prayer and talks about their religious beliefs. So the beliefs, also belong to the individuals who are, in this example, for example, getting married. This law in Florida also just creates a kind of a strict scrutiny level for determining those religious beliefs. Transgender athletes, another, and all of these have been really hot button issues that we're hearing about and seeing all the time. So here's a couple examples of bills, and Michigan has had both of these as bills, and one is funding penalty. That's a latest bill in Michigan. So they tried, the first or the second one, requiring basically a law that says if you have a boys athletic team or a girls, the only people on it must be girls or boys that were determined in that way, their biological sex, they said, determined at birth. And as we know, that's one of the things, and in science, we're learning more, we know more. And we know of ambiguous genitalia. We know that there's more than just a visual look, and there's different factors that come up into denoting a gender. The more recent one in Michigan is a funding penalty. So basically and it just applies to boys wanting to play girls sports. So as is often the case, if you can't discriminate directly, they often take an approach of funding. Ethnic intimidation. So this is Michigan's law. And sometimes you would refer to it as a form of a hate crime law. Florida has an inclusive hate crime law, which includes LGBT identity. Michigan does not. And when you look at it, it's it applies to race, color, religion, gender, national origin. Interestingly, it was called an ethnic intimidation, even though it already included these other areas. And that reflects, how do they sell a law? And one way to sell this law was to call it ethnic intimidation, to not use the word race or gender. The idea that, well, that might sell better to say it's about ethnicity. When you read it, it's much, much broader than that. And there is a case, People v. Rogers, that was decided recently that a judge at the Michigan Court of Appeals level said that it was involving a crime and there was a transgender person, and the judge said that would apply in terms of that particular law. I had a case recently that we were not able to convince the prosecutor. It was clearly assaultive behavior. A neighbor shows up at my client's door. He comes to the door and he gives him all kinds of derogatory name calling. Eventually walks to his pickup truck and comes back with a baseball bat. And, I argued to the prosecutor, they wouldn't charge it. And I argued, well, this is a felonious assault. And they wouldn't, because there is, no hate crime in this regard. And they wouldn't, because they said when he came back with the bat, he didn't come close to my client and he eventually turns around. He didn't swing it. But it just shows there's examples like that all the time where nothing is happening. Equitable parent doctrine, and I think in Florida I've seen it referred to as the de facto parent. And so here's a list. I'm just going to go through this list a little bit. So this is a really significant issue. And before same-sex marriage, it was a huge issue. Now it's still applying to people who aren't married or don't choose to be married. And here's the issue. Let's say you have two lesbian women and they decide to have a child. One woman gets pregnant biologically. They have a child, they raise the child together, two parents, and then they separate. Well, the issue here is that woman who did not have the biological connection in Michigan has no rights. And so I've had a number of cases like this, and basically that person's cut off. And I've had cases where the children are young, where they're elementary age, where they're even teens, and the only thing they've known is these two parents. And then all of a sudden, they can't see that parent at all. And so it's a terrible thing. It hurts children in addition to hurting the adults. And right now it's still, the law is not good, but we, as you may know, in Michigan, we have now a Michigan Supreme Court that has a majority of Democratic appointees, which has, and I think might, make a difference on this issue. The panic defense, that's the idea in a criminal case, there was one recently in a different state, beat up and killed another man who was a gay man. And this has been going on using this defense. The defense is, oh, I panicked because I didn't realize this person was gay and they came on to me, or I didn't realize it. They didn't come on to me, but I didn't realize it. And I thought they were not, and basically people have been able to get away with murder and other violent crimes using this defense. There's a law, neither Florida nor Michigan has a prohibition, and both have bills looking at this. Gender markers, to be able to put X on your birth certificate, driver's license. Michigan has it recently, and Florida does not have that. The use of pronouns, and there's a case, and I will provide this case. It's not about pronouns, but it's a criminal case. But the issue came up, and a 3-panel Court of Appeals, they all agreed with the same outcome. The third judge wrote a concurring opinion solely on the issue of pronouns. And that judge basically said that this is being woke and we shouldn't have anything to do with it. whereas the other two judges had a footnote, just a footnote, and they said, we will respect the pronouns. They were respected at the trial level. Here's a few citations of articles and reasons why we're doing this. The judge who did not, who was very anti and tearing that idea apart, did not include any citations. So I want to give you our section that I'm encouraging all of you to become a member of as law students. It's the Michigan Bar's LGBTQA bar section. We wrote a letter to the Michigan Supreme Court Justice and the Michigan Court of Appeals Justice, and then we circulated it and got a lot of groups to sign on. So this is the kind of thing, or doing amicus brief, or talking about this legislation. You could be involved in any of this, and we'd love you to be a part of that. Some more issues, the first two with gender confirmation treatments and procedures. Recently, Governor Whitmer said that that's going to now be covered by Medicaid. But of course, as you know, that's just for Medicaid recipients. The conversion therapy, again, a recent Michigan executive order saying that Medicaid in Michigan will not cover conversion therapy. And there's a law or a bill in Michigan to basically, I don't want to say outlaw, but to say that there's penalties for the use of that, and similarly in Florida. And then voir dire, a question of this recent case that our group has filed an amicus on. The issue is, if being LGBTQ is relevant in some way to the case, for example, you're married, the question is, can you voir dire about anti-LGBTQ bias? And so again, this case is right now in the system, going up the appeal ladder, and we'll see what comes of that. Here, Florida is ahead of Michigan, and how interesting are two states, Michigan and Florida. They're both states that have had some very negative, slow to the entry of looking at these issues. So Florida does now have a non-discrimination law that applies to sexual orientation and gender identity. Michigan does not. And we have a court, it's written there, or maybe, yeah, Rausch World, that the Michigan Supreme Court should decide this month, maybe July, that will add sexual orientation and gender identity or expression to our Michigan civil rights law. We don't have that. And our civil rights law, as Florida's, doesn't just apply to employment, it applies to housing, public accommodations, and there's other reasons where this comes into play. So there's a bill to do this. It hasn't happened. As you probably know, there's a federal bill to try to do this. Even in light of Bostock, the federal bill, Bostock, the U.S. Supreme Court case that came out a couple years ago was only about employment discrimination. So, and about interpreting Title VII. So it's outrageous, and it's been since the 70s. Every session, the Congress has brought up a bill to do this, and every session it's been, rejected. The closest was in the Clinton administration, and it was one vote short. So the last set of slides I want to talk about, it relates to this issue. This is a book I've recently written. And Jay Kaplan, who's an attorney with the ACLU of Michigan, wrote a foreword. I want to encourage you as law students in your practice to reach out to the ACLU. In Florida, there's a Florida ACLU, and of course the national one, and other organizations like Lambda Legal. Those attorneys are there for you. It's not just about becoming litigants. It's about information. So you've got a case, something's going on. This type of person can not only help you, but tell you, hey, in these 3 states, we're working on this issue. Or in this county, this just came up. My book is about Jerry Crane, a gay high school teacher in the mid-1990s in Byron Center in West Michigan. he was outed. He did not come out. He was outed. And the rest of that school year was just a nightmare. He was harassed. There were several school board meetings about the question of should a gay person be a teacher. That was the issue. Nothing that he did. Um, and it's a horribly sad story, a sad outcome. And I named it in term private love public school because that's part of the issue. It was a public school, and Jerry got married or couldn't get married. He had a commitment ceremony using a minister from his Presbyterian church. So he had a right to his religion, but the school just drove him out, and with horrible, horrible results for him and his life. Couple more slides on the book. This is Jerry and his partner Randy. Jerry's on the right in the solid blue shirt, and this is a couple years before this happened, and he was 32 years old when this happened to him in the mid 90s. And then finally, this is from one of those school board meetings, and this was in the Grand Rapids Press. This shows a group of students who were supportive of him. This board meeting took up a half of the gym, 700 people, and all kinds of people with signs, different than this. He had a core group of students who really supported him, but many students got pulled out of his music classes because their parents made them, and others wanted to. Before that, he was a well-loved, well-respected teacher at the school. So I'd like to now, and I want to talk about the idea of root causes. And when we look at the issue of root causes, what are root causes of social problems? And they're never simple, they're never one, and there's overlap. And so the first one I want to talk about, and these relate to the current environment, but they also relate to where we've been on this issue for a long time. So one is fears. We'll start with a fear of change. As humans, as society, social change, there's always been pushback, and there still is pushback. The worst example in our country is with the treatment of African Americans. And the pushback continues. And by pushback, I mean, something happens that's in a positive way or a direction that's trying to do something. And then there's all this pushback. Certainly a recent example would be the election of an African American to be the president, and the pushback from that. And what, and it comes out in all kinds of ways, including discriminatory ways and violent ways. Along with that fear is demographics. Demographics are changing. They have changed. The idea of our country being primarily white, the power being primarily white male straight, and it being primarily Christian, those statistics are all changing. So we have an increasing number of people of color, an increasing number of people from different religions, people who don't believe or say they're spiritual but not religious, and within Christianity, a number of denominations or churches that have become very accepting and affirming to LGBT people. And so there's fear about that. Certainly another fear is there's a younger generation that sees things differently, that sees and understands a spectrum for gender identity, a spectrum for sexuality, and they have a comfort with it. Even younger people who are evangelical Christian, the younger people, this is not, and again, not everyone, but there's studies to show for many of them, this is not an issue. They're not as much into these kinds of social issues of taking a negative approach. And so fear of the other. A couple other root causes, science. We have a human history of rejecting developments in science, whether it's flat Earth, whether it's ideas of climate change, and now these issues about gender and sexual orientation. We know more, and science has helped in that regard, and people are uncomfortable with that. Many people. Religion. And again, the issue here is not to disrespect religions who hold certain beliefs. The issue is we're talking about law and policy and in a secular nation. And so that's where these things become problematic, and fleshing out what is church and state separation. Is the freedom of religion belongs to everyone, including people who identify as LGBTQ. And then finally, sex. Many people are, well, most people are uncomfortable with anything that has to do in any way related to sex. And for many people, that's where they go. They hear these words, this identity, and that's what they think of, and that's uncomfortable for them, and that makes it, that way. I will add that there's a number of people who both have internal homophobia or transphobia. They have not come out internally, and people who have not come out and they've devoted their life to anti-LGBTQ action. So, and we can name a list of whether it's ministers, politicians who really devote their lives to this issue, being against it, and then we find out that on some level, they're having sex with somebody of the same sex, or they're, it's a part of their identity, but it's pushed down, and then they deny it. So those are some of the root causes. I want to move on then to some practical things. How do you create change? And you as law students, you as individuals, members of our society. And I start with voting. Voting is one of the most important things. As students, it's easy to lose track of it. You live different places, you have a home address, you have a couple addresses from school. You need to look into that to make sure that's all smoothed out for you, and understand that everything's going to be tougher going to vote this time. Consider being a poll challenger or a volunteer. So anybody can go volunteer at their county or city, township to work the polls. I'd encourage you to sign up to work as a poll challenger. This is something I've been doing in presidential elections for a couple of decades. It's done in Michigan by party, and I believe it's done that way in Florida. I looked in the Florida Democratic Party, for example, and I couldn't find something right away. But Michigan, if you just go to the Michigan Democratic Party and volunteer and about a poll challenger, you don't have to be a lawyer, but they like people who have that kind of background. And you'll be trained. There'll be an online training of what to do that day. And the challenger isn't like it sounds. You're not there, making arguments. You're there to monitor. And if something comes up, you calling someone who's heading up that county or area with issues. And so it's very educational. And this isn't, if you're a Republican, we need you too. We need people to do these jobs who care about the law. So whatever party you are, we need people. And that's been my history until recently. When there's a Republican challenger and I'm there as a Democratic challenger, there's never been problems about, one against the other. We talk about something that comes up and we talk about it, and one might have a different interpretation, but it's been nothing but the goal here is to make sure that person can vote if it's possible. Social media. You can use social media in such a positive way, and I encourage you to do so. I encourage you to place yourself as an educator. People will and already have looked up to you because of your work in the law. And so become that person. Don't engage in the name calling, the obscenities. And again, if that's you, that's you. But as a law student, that we're about persuasion, and that you're going to persuade. To persuade, you have to get the person to listen. And if you're calling their person by names, if you're calling them names, that closes the door. So use your social media, use it responsibly, post things that are educational, give your comment on news events. So let me move it to, as a lawyer, a few tips. And one of them is, again, educating and speaking up. And what I mean here is whatever the issue is, and it might be, let's say, a pronoun issue, for example. Speak up gently, politely. Don't assume the worst on the other person. If you have a client with a case who's transgender, a phone call to the other attorney, mentioning it in chambers. Don't do it in a way that might embarrass. Don't write an email that might be accusatory, even though you didn't mean it that way. People can be more open with a telephone call. In your court documents, the same thing. You need to educate. And your education is beyond just writing a motion or writing the brief. You might need to put in there a sentence or a paragraph about this particular issue. And you might need to cite other state laws because your state doesn't have what we need, but you can do that. And a judge might say, oh, this is state court. What are you doing here? You can just say, this is a changing, evolving area. I thought this would be instructive. It's persuasive. And if, the judge can take it or leave it, but don't be afraid to do that. And the judges will say, what's your authority? If I want you to use this particular name, not use their dead name, what's your authority? Well, first, the judges have authority in how they run their courtroom. And there's ethical rules for lawyers and judges of treating people with respect. There's ethical rules about not discriminating against people in a protected group. And Florida already has that in terms of employment non-discrimination. We have it in Michigan as it relates to Bostock, and hopefully we'll have it in our state laws soon. And pointing out the good things if you're working with businesses about why it's good business, why it's good to engage in these kinds of positive ideas in your handbooks, in your dealings with people. And just finally, I guess I want to wrap up here for questions. Again, try not to put people down, try not to embarrass, try to assume the best and get to know them, and make it conversational, and really in that way try to persuade. So I want to stop here, and I want to address any questions.
Thanks, Christine. And while people are formulating or thinking about their questions, a few notes. Last year, actually, Jay Kaplan was our Pride speaker for
Wonderful.
Our community conversation, and Jay's a good friend. And also wanted to note that Jesse, our distinguished alum, is on the call, and happy to see her as well. And then another alum of ours, Saida Bina Davidson, she got involved with the ACLU on their lawyers committee, and then now is a staff attorney at the ACLU of Michigan. So getting involved can also lead to employment opportunities as well. So those volunteer experiences can really open doors for you. So I want to keep that in mind for our students. So now we'll open it up to questions if there are any. I haven't seen any in chat yet. Anybody who would like to, oh, here's we go. I've got one from Francis. Francis, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, hi, my name is Francis Solneba. I'm a third term student here at Cooley. So thank you for coming to speak to us today, and happy Pride. My question is kind of about the Texas law that you brought up, because prior to coming to law school, I was actually a special education teacher in Houston, Texas for about 4 years. And during that time, I actually had 2 transgender students. I worked in a private school that was, very inclusive. And so that was like the safest space for them. And I'm wondering now, like, what are like the social services or resources for students like that and their families? Because, hearing you talk, hearing what I have heard about that law, it's like this natural human behavior is becoming so criminalized, and I'm wondering like how, like, what is going to happen to those students? Like, they haven't graduated from high school yet. Like, I feel like they're in danger, of being criminalized, and their parents as well. So like, do you have any information you can share sort of about resources that are kind of here to help defend students and families in those situations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to talk about teaching in general, but first to your question, what I'd advise, what I do and would do is first of all, like I said, to contact like the ACLU, Lambda Legal, and maybe both. And they're going to be hot on the issue, and they will have people that you could contact, or they'll have resources also. I would also go to, there's always national or state associations. So maybe it's the National Association of Social Workers. Go to them. They're likely to have an LGBTQ section. And go to them. And it's also likely that they're now working on that issue, and they're trying to come up with those resources. And so you want to go to those places who care about these issues, and locally the same thing. Depending on the size of the city, you might have a well-developed local LGBTQ organization that's on it. In Grand Rapids right now, there's a consortium of healthcare providers who care about this issue. That would be a great group here to go to. And then for teaching, it's horrible because we ask so much of teachers and we blame them for everything. And I want to add that when this Jerry Crane story, 25 years later, and I've talked to a lot of teachers currently, they are still afraid of coming out. And they're afraid, even in liberal districts, because it only takes one parent or a couple parents to make a big deal. And no teacher wants to be in the news or be, for being picked on for being gay or have that attention. So you're right, and thanks for your work. It sounds like you were a great resource for these kids. But I think it's about getting together with other organizations and reaching out to those who are on the forefront.
Francis, I'm going to do a plug too. I sit on the board of an organization called Stand with Trans, which is based in Michigan, but in COVID has really expanded its reach nationally. And they have support groups for trans youth, young adults, and their loved ones. So you might check that out. I put a link in the chat to their website, and they're working on a national resource library as well. So thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Director Freeman.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I really appreciate it. I work here for the law school. And first I want to make a comment, and then I have a question for you. But my comment, when you were talking about the Florida Don't Say Gay bill and had used the example that, kindergarten through third grade, one of the things that kids do is draw pictures of their families, getting to know you. I was recently going through I have teenagers now, but going through all of those papers, and in your comment made me realize how many of the pictures and getting to know you activities that kids participate at that age are tell me about your family and who lives with you. And that was just really powerful for me. And the feeling of shame and silence that those kids must feel, that they cannot freely talk about their families and who they love. But my question to you, when talking about the root causes, do you think that social media would be also considered a root cause, and perhaps has enabled through misinformation and people with extremist views to gather? I mean, more recently, we saw the incidents of some individuals who were arrested outside of a LGBTQ event. No telling what they were planning on doing, but certainly planning on causing a disruption. And so do you see social media as being a root cause as well?
I do. Interestingly, it's also can be something positive. But yeah, it's clearly problematic. And part of it is our societal, how we've separated so much to the point where and I'll use an example of moderate Republicans, in most of my life, like I guess it started changing in the 80s, but there were a lot of moderate Republicans and there were conservative Democrats, and they often overlapped and there were conversations. Well, what's happened in the last few years is it's worse. And so there's these sites that just focus and truth telling, and I think absolutely these companies have a responsibility. I mean, we all know you go on something and you just looked up, you want to buy a new TV, and all of a sudden you're seeing TV. So that we give them so much of us, they have a responsibility, and that's going to take more regulation and enforcement. On the other hand, it certainly makes it, Frank, you mentioned that Stand with Trans, again, during COVID, it made a lot of these things because of this kind of technology more, broader than the local and even the state and even international. So it's something that we need to be really on in terms of regulation, in terms of, how we teach students about using it. And that idea of sourcing, what's the source, and teaching to look at sources. Yeah, thank you.
Great. I don't see any questions in the queue right now, but I have one, Christine, and that's, we have seen the draft opinion by Alito overturning Roe. And I think it shocked the country in a lot of ways, but a secondary conversation that I'm not hearing as much as maybe I hope we will is the effect that that decision, at least as written, could have on LGBTQ rights. And I wonder if you might want to chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's very disturbing. It's very much, again, we're going to the 70s and now we're going backwards in this huge way. And absolutely that opens the door to, because this is born of right to privacy and rights like the right to, the marriage equality was focused on that kind of idea. The issues of, equal protection, due process, how we treat people, who women versus men on different issues. And now we're also looking at old laws on the books. And so, like, Michigan has an old law criminalizing abortion. Well, then all of a sudden there's a thought, oh, we need to get rid of that law. And that's one of the hardest things when there's old laws. No politician wants to run on the fact that, there's a law still about women and children shouldn't swear in Michigan. It's still there. No one's going to run on the notion that I'm fighting to basically it'll be turned to you want to let women and children swear. But we need to be, we need to do those things. But absolutely, it's very much a concern. It's going to be, we'll look at the voting rights, we'll look at the abortion, the LGBT concerns, all these areas, and justices who are going to be there for a long time. And that's where I go back to voting, and you have to educate your friends and pull them out, and family, and pull them out to vote. It's really bad. I read a book that I used in a class, and it's a book, in fact, I have it here. It's called Her Body, Our Laws. And it was written by a law professor. And what she did was looked at laws in El Salvador and Oklahoma on abortion. And I used this. It was actually, I used it, and then the semester happened where all this abortion stuff broke out. Well, one of the interesting things she talks about, because she interviewed all kinds of people, state representatives in Oklahoma said what I've heard before is that these politicians want a wedge issue. Their concern is getting elected and staying elected. No moral courage. And that's Democrats too. I mean, that's not just a one-party thing. But he actually said that if Roe gets overturned, and this was before all this stuff, we need this issue. We want this wedge issue. And gee, if it gets overturned, what do we do then? Because we want, and of course, there'll always be something. It's about scapegoating, right? It's about, the book Caste. I hope a lot of you have read that. It's about taking people and putting them, and African Americans, at the lowest in our caste system, and then other people of color, and then other immigrants and different people from different countries and of different backgrounds, and so how do we deal with this and that need to scapegoat, and that's what all this stuff is about. If we didn't have these people, if we didn't have these people doing this, and they're not of these people, and they're not all doing whatever this is, gee, our life would be better. And my life's this and that, and it's because of you, it's because of they, it's because of other. So yeah, I think this is just a horrible development, and we know the only way around it is going to be new legislation. Good luck. Our midterm elections are so important, and then changing the Constitution is such a long, difficult battle.
Thank you for that. Dean Brightfield, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I had the occasion to read a little bit about you through your bio and your website, and you're very accomplished, and you've been persuasive for many years. So this question for you is about technique. I'm curious how you talk to people who don't see things the way you do without isolating them, and how you would advise people to engage those who are opposed to your views, strategies, techniques, and maybe what you've done in your career that, and have you ever changed anyone's mind? I'm just curious.
Yeah, great question. I don't know. I can't say. I think I have changed minds on the laws that should apply. I don't know of anything where I've changed someone's mind on that entire question of, I'm anti-LGBTQ and now I'm not. But with the law, like, so for example, the children, I mean, our country says we all love children. And of course we know, oh yeah, we can say that, but here's a whole list of things we're not doing. And now we want to say child abuse, and we want to, do all these things, but appealing to children, how things affect children. So with that equitable parenting, with, all of these different things that have come up, if you can take the children's approach, that's a better argument. And it's harder if you're using that approach for a judge to say, I don't care, or to just issue a decision where they don't care. In the, I think it was the Windsor case, U.S. Supreme Court, I think that was the case where they talked about family, and the case was about the Defense of Marriage Act, and not, allowing same-sex couples or, to use federal benefits and have marriage recognized. But they talked about kids, and they talked about a kid should be able to be proud of their family and shouldn't be treated as a second-class child. And so I think whenever you can take it to children. I think another thing is to be creative in this field, because we don't often have the law. We have to be creative, and that creativity might be looking to a source that particular judge or person might value. So maybe you have what might be considered, this particular judge is more conservative politically, but then you find a law review article, or you find a case that was by a more conservative judge, and then here's what they did. So you're looking to who that person is, what's there, what will connect to them, and knowing that, they're not going to want to, hear, if you give them something and it's from someone that they think of that's this or that, you can be more persuasive by doing that. And then I'd say, giving them a chance to do it in a way where you're being polite and you're acknowledging and you're not accusing, because it's very easy to go the other way when people say, you know, some ridiculous things.
Thank
And
you.
you'll get some people mad, and as a lawyer, having thick skin is a part of it. So you have to be able to smile, how we're taught, thank you, Your Honor, take the bench. One other thing I wanted to mention was making a record. So let's say you go back in chambers and you say, I'm asking, Your Honor, that we use my client's name, not their dead name, that we use their pronouns. Regardless of what's said, if the judge says, let's do that, when you go back in court for whatever you're going back for, assuming it's in chambers before something, put it on the record. Your Honor, I'd just like to put in the record, we had a discussion and the court said, if they disagree, and this is the harder thing that takes courage, but you have to do it as a lawyer, that say the judge got mad about it and just said, this is ridiculous and not in my courtroom. You still have to go in the court and put that on the record. Now you're judging whether that's a good idea at this particular point in the case, but as we know, we can only appeal if we put it on the record. We can only let our clients see us fighting for them if we put it on the record and give them that respect to say, and just wording it, you know, we talked about the issue and the court determined that the court's not going to use the pronouns or allow the use of the dead name. You know, just simply put it on the record. And you know, judges, they shouldn't care about being overturned, but some do. So
Thank you. We're running up against time. Any other questions from the audience?
and if not, I'd like to just say, in rounding up again, I really, we need people on this LGBTQ bar section. And don't feel like one thing you can do is just show up at one of our monthly meetings and just see what we're about. You could be on a committee, and there's social things. We went to the Tigers game on their Pride Day a couple weeks ago. So, you know, not just this organization, but find an organization that speaks to your values and connect with that. And know that all of you, I'm sure you've already created good change in your lives. And you might not think so, but you have. You didn't get to this without doing that. And I encourage you to keep doing so. We all need each other, and every step matters.
Thank you so much. That's such a great note to close on. And I just want to note for those who are participating that we've a couple times posted the contact information for Christine and also for the LGBTQA section of the Michigan Bar. So thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your time and participation today, particularly you, Christine. And again, happy Pride.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Frank.
it.